Okay, can you all hear me? Yes, okay, excellent. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be talking to people in Azerbaijan and wherever. The work that I'm going to be talking about is obviously, well, obviously, but it's all in England, but I hope that it holds universal lessons for how one can make old buildings serve the present and the future. I should say by background that I'm an architect, and I chose to specialize in working with old buildings because I thought that it was a particularly interesting area of study. To my mind, it has all of the problems of designing new buildings, but in addition to that, it has the problems of working with existing buildings, working with the layers of complication of the way the buildings come to be as they are. And it also deals with something that's very close to my heart, which is the texture of age. In other words, the aspects of decay and so on are all part of old buildings, and to my mind can be treasured. And so all of my decisions about these things are based partly on technical matters, partly on social matters about how you make them work, and partly on aesthetic matters. And I say this unapologetically because I think a lot of people think of it as being purely a technical subject, and I don't think that it need to be limited in that way. So I thought it might be helpful there are just 3 slides here, which are boring bullet points, but just to summarize the way we look after old buildings in this country. And the thing is, it's not just buildings. It's I've listed them here. Schedule ancient monuments, that means usually ruins of buildings which have collapsed or fallen down or discovered under the ground. Listed buildings, which is buildings of merit, which can be grade 1, 2-star, or 2, according to how important they are. Conservation areas, that's from the 1960s, the idea that areas of towns can themselves be historic and therefore they have a protection as an area, conservation areas. Then there's so-called locally listed buildings, which are mentioned in local plans as being buildings of interest, which are not actually listed in the in the full sense. And then there's listed parks and gardens. So there's a whole panoply of things which are covered by protection. And the question is, how is decisions about giving listed building consent actually achieved? What's the methodology? So the whole framework of planning in this country, including planning for listed buildings, is now comes under the umbrella of sustainable development. And for those of you who know your definition of sustainability, which is about looking after what the things that we have now in a way that doesn't prejudice the way that future generations can look after them, then the 3 planks of that sustainability are that they deliver social benefit, they deliver economic benefit, and they deliver environmental benefit. So that applies to all development, but in relation to listed buildings or historic buildings, then the chief one is obviously environmental benefit, because we talk about the historic environment. And but it's equally the case that in all of the work that I do, the appeal to social benefit and the appeal to economic benefit is absolutely implicit in making the case for what we want to do as well. So how do you set about, as it were, making the case for what you want to do? Well, I've listed sort of 5 steps here. Number 1, it's understanding the history of the building. If you don't understand how the building comes to be as it is, you're on a pretty weak footing for planning its future. And so that is the background, as it were, to all of the subsequent stages. Number two, significance. Well, significance is a clunky word, but it basically means establishing what is important about the building. So the significance may be that there's a rare bat in the attic, or it may be that there is, it's associated with a person you've heard of, or it may be that it's a place where some event took place in such and such a year, or it could simply be that the local people use it as a community centre, and therefore it's very significant to them for that reason. So there are all sorts of different types of significance, but to try and work out the ones which relate to the building you're looking at is the next step. So number three, issues. Understand the issues facing the building. Well, the primary issue with historic buildings is condition. So to have a condition survey to work out what, whether the water's coming in, whether there's rot, whether there's termites or whatever it might be. Then there are the issues to do with use. In other words, is it a derelict building because nobody knows how to use it and it needs investment in order to use it for anything, and so on. So there are lots of different sort of issues that can be facing a building as well. Then number four, I've said, is design. In other words, working with whoever the client is who's trying to give a future for this building to design in a way that is sustainable in the future. And then the final one is to carry out an analysis of the impact of the proposals on the historic building, or shall we say, the significance of the historic building, so that in the statutory process, when you apply for permission, you have to say, well, we need to knock a hole in the historic wall here, and the impact is that you lose historic bricks, or but the mitigation is we're going to reuse those bricks somewhere else on the site. So that's all part of what we go through. And at the end of the day, you hope you get your consent, you go ahead, and it's all smooth. So that's by way of introduction. And I thought that I would start off by talking about an extraordinary project that I was involved with right at the start of my career, on the oldest house in East London. And it's a house which was built in the early 16th century, and it was altered at just about every century or half century after that. So there are at least 6 different layers of historic interest in the building. And so on the left, we have the front of the building before the work started. And on the right, we have the house as repaired. In 1986, on the left, the house was derelict. The previous use had, the tenants had moved out very suddenly. And the building, which was owned by the National Trust, who are our leading preservation organization, they didn't know what to do with it. And it was very primitive. So after a lot of discussion, when it was going to be turned into private flats, and therefore, as it were, privatized and sold off, the local people got together and said, look, this isn't good enough, because it was acquired by the National Trust with public funds for the benefit of the the people, as it were. And so they persuaded the trust to invest in doing what we call the community scheme. And the community scheme was to reuse a house, partly as a historic house, but the rooms could also be used for events and functions, that there was a cafe, that there was a shop, and there was a temporary changing exhibition, so that anyone who went along, it wasn't just that you went to see a historic house, but there was a reason to go frequently, as it were. So that is actually what the house looked like when it was built. It was, you can just about see, if I go back, that you get the two wings either side. And can you see my cursor, by the way, if I do that? Yeah, okay. So this wing and this wing are that wing and that wing. And all of the appearance of the house was reconstructed from evidence in the house itself. And we now know that the house was built by the man on the right, who was actually one of the ministers of state to Henry VIII. And this is a really rather fantastic portrait of him by Hans Holbein, the painter. So I had the extraordinary job of repairing the house from a derelict condition for community purposes and making all the decisions about the different layers. So on the left here, we have the west elevation. You can see that the chimney has been truncated, and you can see that there's a 16th century window here, which has been bricked up. And on the right, you can see that I put a chimney back on, and we reopened that window to give the views outside. And then this is this room here is that room here. So we had to go right back to the shell to repair it. And we had this extraordinary excitement of finding these evidence. So this is one of the high level windows that you see on the reconstructed drawing. And you probably can't see, but it's painted in like linen fold paneling. This is what we call linen fold paneling here. So this is like folded linen fabric. And the colors were that the frame was in red, the linen was in yellow, the background of the linen was in green, and you had little gold leaf stenciled flowers on the intersection of the rails and the stiles. And so it's all of this sort of evidence which led to the reconstruction drawing. And because you had, in this case, painted paneling below real paneling, I came up with the device of having hinge panels so you could always see the earlier layer below the later one. And this is in the Tudor kitchen. When I say Tudor, I mean 16th century. And you can see how the beam over the kitchen fireplace has been chopped through and propped up with a piece of wood, and it's been filled in. And then, so we on the right here, we took out that lot of brick, but we left the other, and we reopened the thing here to get it linked up properly. And if you see here, we restored this four-centered arch, which was an amazing piece of brickwork by the craftsman bricklayer, because each brick has to be carved and all four faces in order to repair the arch. It's a four-centered arch on the skew, as we would call it. And this is rather a wonderful example of layering as well. This is 18th century paneling, and behind it, we get the 16th century fireplace, and it's being propped up with bits of wood because it's all broken and about to collapse. So if you look here, we've repaired or restored the Georgian fireplace, but we left hinge panels again in order to see the 16th century layer underneath. And then this is my favorite. This is the Victorian study, and that is that before the work. This fireplace came from downstairs, But you'll see here, there isn't any opening at all. And what happened is that this is what's called a privy shaft. It's where the loo, the toilet was for the 16th century house. And it was bricked up in the 18th century. And when we unbricked it, we discovered these cobwebs, which have been growing for 200 years. So here on the left are the cobwebs, which I carefully preserved. I think they're very, very beautiful cobwebs. And then when the house was empty, there were squatters who lived in it on top floor. And this is a symbol of a pop group. And this again is carefully preserved in the house. And then the new layer in the early 20th century barn, then this is me creating a gallery for concerts in the barn. And then this is my cafe conservatory, which links the wing with the barn. That's a cafe counter on the right. And it's all on a square grid. So if you can just tell that there's the square of ash in the floor goes on up the outside along the top and then down the rafters. It's all square grid in plan. So that was, as it were, my rather wonderful initiation into the wonders of old buildings. And I'm now going to illustrate a couple of projects which are to do with buildings in the public ownership. And it has to be said that most of my work is with buildings in the public domain rather than work for private residential owners. And we're very fortunate in this country that for the last 15, 20 years, we have funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It's basically a sweepstake gambling with tickets, and the profits from that go to 5 good causes, one of which is the heritage. And so, but in order to get the money, you have to demonstrate that you're dealing with the issues of the building, i.e. the condition, and then making it sustainable in the future, both by giving it a social purpose, but more importantly, in my view, to give it an economic purpose, because if the building is not capable of creating enough income to keep it up, then in a sense, the capital put into it may fail, and then you're back to square one in a few years' time. So both of these ones are trying to get that balance between social benefit, economic benefit, and environmental benefit, as I mentioned at the beginning. So first, Chisholm House. Well, this is one of, London is very fortunate in having a lot of parks, which often came as the gardens or parkland associated with a particular house. So this was a privately owned house built in the 1790s, and it became, the park was taken over by the local authority in about 1880, and it's been a house in a park ever since. But whereas the park has been very well used, the house they've never quite known what to do with. Therefore, it's in a totally derelict state until we started work. So the only thing that happened in the house was a cafe, and the cafe was in the portico here. And then in front of the cafe is what had been a sloping lawn was flat, and it was a muddy hole with these rather nasty plastic tables. And on the side of the house, you can see here that there's a great big hedge, which meant that all of the rooms down here were totally inaccessible and derelict. So the only thing that wasn't derelict was a cafe. And that's the state inside, following a fire. And this is the state in the staircase. So, going back to my list of 5 stages, the first one, discovering the history of the house. Well, this is a rather wonderful house, photo of the house in its heyday. And what's remarkable about it is that you get a slope up to the Doric portico, and it's a 2-story villa on a little hill. And then the other side, it's conventional 3-story brick house. It's very beautiful. And these plans, I mean, just to say briefly that we found a plan from the 1920s where it appeared the house at that stage had never been changed. So this is the 18th century plan, I think. You went in under the portico here, hallway, staircase, drawing room, dining room, library, north drawing room, and then this was the main floor. And when we started work, well, that partition meant that there'd been staircase was cut off. Most people had never known that there was a staircase there. And then the kitchen for the cafe was in the former library, and it was pretty squalid. So what we've done is to move the kitchen down to the lower level and then link it by dumb waiters, which you can see here. And to put those in meant taking out a complete mass of brickwork with 4 steels on top of it. And that was slightly controversial because of the loss of fabric, but the economic argument won out, and the historic argument about the being able to put the floor back to its 1790s condition, with the exception of a lift, loo, and baby changing in the least important part of the house. So that was the strategy. And then the way it works currently is that the public enter this way to the cafe, or they enter from the side at lower level. The cafe operates on 2 levels. And then these are function rooms, and the first floor rooms are function rooms as well, which can be let. So here we have, instead of the hedge, we have a nice terrace for seating facing south below the terrace. And then this is the servery for the cafe with the chimney breast taken out to get the dumb waiters. In other words, the lifts, which take the food up and down from the kitchen. And this photo taken in a spring day, I think, just shows how wonderfully heavily used the house now is, with people sitting down and sitting on the grass lawn, and the new terrace here with crowds of people at the weekend. It's a massive success. So next, I show a church project. It's an alphage. I don't know if any of you know your English architectural history, but the architect Hawksmoor is one of our great neoclassical architects from the early years of the 18th century. And he was inspired by Roman temples. And you can just about see here, this is basically a Roman temple. And you can also see in the front here, quite how dirty the stone is. And you can see this overthrow, which I'll come back to later. And although Hawksmoor was a brilliant architect, unfortunately, he, like Wren and other people at the time, they extensively used iron bars to hold stones together. And you can see that the expansion of the ironwork has broken off the whole of the dentil at this point here. So the project started off with further research, and we discovered this rather wonderful drawing by Hawksmoor, making it look even more temple-like than it is. Lovely drawing. And interestingly, if you look up here closely, you can just see the pin pricks where he would have pricked through from another drawing to transfer the information from one drawing to the other. And then this is for Omid. This is a recording exercise from a point cloud survey. And you can see the point cloud survey takes in the north elevation, and it also takes in the crypt. So this is the crypt underneath the ground where the burials are, which is nicely knitted together to make this very, very evocative drawing. So I thought you'd like that one. So now this is the project after we just completed it. So what was the project? Well, the project was about making the church accessible to visitors, to make it open and welcoming to visitors. And it was to deal with the condition issues, and it was to re-landscape the churchyard in order to make everything properly accessible. So on this elevation, it's all been cleaned, and the roof has been repaired so that the water, which was previously going down inside the building, is now, there's an overflow which takes it directly to the outside. And then the side we're looking from is the way through from the World Heritage Site of the Royal Naval College in Greenwich. And so the entrance, which was previously at the West End, is now facing where visitors come from the rest of the World Heritage Site. And we put this, what I call the overthrow, back again over the entrance, leading up to the what's now the main entrance door. And then you can just see here is the access ramp. So this is a closer view of the entrance. So people on foot will go up the steps this way, and people in wheelchair, you come gently uphill from the thing here, and then you go all the way up here at a 1 in 20 ramp. And I was very insistent that I wanted to have a single line for the handrail. And I don't know if it applies with you, but we have to have a landing halfway up. So there's a flat bit from there to there. So, but the handrail carries on in a straight line. So it's not quite parallel to the foot, but it does make I hope, a nice line. And interestingly, this is a sketch that we did when I was appointed at the church 25 years ago. And it's taken 25 years to actually get the ramp built, but it got there in the end, thanks to the Heritage Lottery Fund. And here it is with the recessed lighting. And just look at the Hawksmoor stonework. I mean, isn't it stunningly fantastic? And these amazing, great keystones. Then to get loos inside, toilets inside the church, major problem. So these are actually pods, as we call them, which are little boxes put into the well of the staircase. There are 4 identical staircases. To have 2 of them with pods in it is not too serious. And then inside the pod, here's a staircase going up. And then here is the door into the cupboard under the stairs, which acts as the panel for the loo. And then inside the church, finally, we, having cured the water leakage, we redecorated the inside. And it's, you know, a fantastic church it is. one little further bit of public benefit, which was delivered by the scheme, apart from the loos, the use, the concerts, the accessibility, the cleaning, the so on, was opening to the public the crypt. And so the crypt was all of these lovely brick vaults. And then up here, you've got a wall behind which you get bodies which have been stacked for burials. And there are some important and famous people buried in this crypt. So they now have hard hat tours at the weekend to visit the crypt. And so we redid the lighting and cleaned it up. So that is an example of a project where the existence of money from the Heritage Lottery Fund meant that one could get the capital cost of making the improvements for public benefit, but with the proviso that it then has to look after itself into the future. And so it's that side of things which I find interesting and challenging. But on the other hand, I do think that one wants buildings to be used and enjoyed. And if they're used and enjoyed, then they're more likely to make money for than if they're, I don't know, just what used to be the case, you did it up and then it started decaying again and that was it. So I just move on to a couple of examples actually which are more about design than they are about conservation, but they're design in the context of important old buildings. And so I just wanted to show you two examples which take different approaches to design. Southwark Cathedral is very much designing in context with the same sort of materials as you find in the cathedral. The second one I'm going to talk about, Lambeth Palace, was very much about contrast. It's about steel, glass and timber within a masonry shell. So if I just go through Southwark Cathedral first. This is what it looked like before work started in 1993. And here's the cathedral. And this is a building built by my predecessor as cathedral architect. And unfortunately, that was all built about 5 steps higher than the public square and 5 steps higher than the cathedral because it's built above a car park. And as a result, then the only way into the cathedral from this way was up a bearing of stairs, and it was all pretty disastrous, really. And this was at a time when the cathedral was being advised that the number of visitors was likely to go up by a factor of 10 within 5 years, because the south bank of the River Thames has been really exploding in use thanks to Tate modern gallery and other things. So again, the brief was about attending to visitors and accessibility and a shop, refectory, meeting rooms, like a sort of conference center. So again, you do your history, and this is a rather evocative drawing of what it would have been like when the church was built, because it wasn't a parish church then, it wasn't a cathedral, it was a priory church, and this is a priory church. This is the sort of cloister between it and the River Thames. And then this is the gatehouse. So you went in this way, and then you went through into that court and back into the cathedral here or here. And this is Old London Bridge with its, you know, the heads of the beheaded convicts and traitors. Anyway, so on the right here, 1940, the whole is now a parish church, and it's been cut off from the river by these massive warehouses. And then there was a massive fire, so leading to the square that you saw previously. I skipped over this drawing, which is, here's the church, and this is a drawing recording what was still there in the 1840s. So you can see this is the cloister here, and this is the gatehouse here with the way in there. And so this building, which was demolished later in the 19th century, became the stimulus for our new building. So here is the new wing sticking out at right angles to the cathedral, with a thinner range of rooms along the front. And it follows the materials and the general, some of the forms of the cathedral, with the steep pitch roof here, the copper roofs here and here, the buttresses here, which aren't buttresses, they're cladding for brick piers holding up a precast concrete structure, and then a forecourt in the size of the medieval cloister. And here's the model of it. There was a plan to cut some steps down to the river, but that never happened, unfortunately. So here it is as built, and you see the steep pitch roofs, the low pitch roofs, and then the railings around the whole site, pulling it together. And if you look on the cathedral itself, you'll see that there are two sorts of flint. You get a light-colored flint here in the stone, and you get a dark flint here. And on our new wing, we have the darker flints within a pattern which is typical of work in the 15th century, but a good opportunity to use it in a more contemporary way with the wide-eaved thing. And then this is the passageway which leads from the entrance up to the cathedral, and it, because it's very long, you can take up as a gentle slope the 6 steps that I talked about between the level of the chapter house up here and the level of the entrance, which is just behind us here. And then the big room on the first floor is made of crux, precast concrete arches, and they're back to back because you do them on their face. So you put the rough face together in the middle, and it's stimulated by an amazing arts and crafts church in Northumberland, by one of my favorite churches, by E.S. Pryor in Roker. Fantastic building. And then this is the car park before, with the remains of, this is a curved wall from a Norman apse. And then at the end of the day, we managed to, within the internal route, we had a pit to show off the archaeology, including the curved apse, the 14th century chapter house, and a rather wonderful 17th century kiln for making Delftware. And then disability access, then the steps down from that into the cathedral, steps and a platform lift, equally spaced. And finally, the cathedral courtyard, which was rather mucky before, with paths at high and low level. We made a distinction between the fast through path for commuters here, and then we had a meandering path here where you could sit back and look at the cathedral and have your sandwiches. So that was sort of design in context. This one is more about design in contrast. And again, it's about opening up a building to the public. And the building in question, Lambeth Palace, is the London home of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Church of England. And this is what it looked like before we started. This is actually a medieval chapel, 15th century chapel, or 14th century chapel rather. And this courtyard here had been filled up with various later bits of building in a rather squalid fashion. And this is the courtyard, and this is a medieval window into the lower chapel. And this is the rather wonderful staircase which leads down into the lower chapel as we found it. So we cleared out the buildings in the courtyard, and we replaced the link between here and here with a bridge. And then we lowered this level to be below the windowsill. And then you came down steps here, and then just behind me, there's a lift which links all different levels. And then we designed glass and roof, which I always like my steelwork to be a bronze color. I think the high-tech white is not for me. So if you look at this little detail on the right, I mean, it just I don't know. I mean, it makes all the difference. I think there's actually bronze powder in the in the paint so that it sparkles a little bit. And then this is the view of the finished thing with the medieval chapel wall here. And we decided just to, as it were, patch this up with lime mortar and not to put complete, because it's much more interesting looking at the different materials in the wall. And then this is my favorite detailing of the balustrade, where you see, can you just see, there's a tiny little rod, which is a 6mm rod. And by virtue of tying all of the bars together, each of which is 6mm deep, then you can get away with it in a way that you couldn't otherwise. So here's looking down into the courtyard. And one other thing to say is that one always likes to turn a problem into an opportunity. And in this case, we found that the wall, this wall here, the foundation of the wall stopped at this level here. And so we had the idea of, instead of underpinning, which would have been expensive, to buttress it with concrete beam either side. And that is at the level that it becomes a seat around the edge of the courtyard in a way that works quite well. And this is what I call my Romeo and Juliet balcony. And then you go down into the wonderful 13th century crypt. And the thing to say here is, and I'll come back to this, but one wanted to just keep this as uncluttered as possible. So these benches, which are made out of solid wood, you can see how they're just mitered at the ends here. They have the radiator, which is sitting between them. The electric sockets are fixed to the underside of the seat, and then they the pipes go from one to the other in a especially thick pipe so that they can span the whole distance without needing fixings into the ground. And then looking back again, then this is the access into the chapel, and this is actually all about this disability access, because this is a platform lift. So it's got glass in the front, and the balustrade here, which is like this, is a gate. And so, and then it's paved with the same paving as the chapel. And there's the bench with the And there's the pipes shooting off there. I thought you might like to see St Pancras because this is the international station for London in the most extraordinary building which survives in the 19th century, which is St Pancras Station by the architect George Gilbert Scott. And we became involved, well, in about 1997, actually, because there was the international station was about to come to the building, and they had a designer architect competition, client architect competition for taking on the hotel, which was always built by Scott to face the station. And so after about 10 years of nothing happening, we were appointed with other architects. They said that, okay, now they wanted to get on. It was worth getting on with the hotel because the station was, going to be ready in a few years. And the whole deal was that when they got consent for the station, they hadn't really thought about the hotel very much, except to think that they needed to have 170 additional bedrooms if they were going to make it work financially. And the other architect who we were working with got into trouble with English Heritage about designing something to hold 170 bedrooms. And in desperation, they said to us, who were basically just the conservation people, would we like to have a go? So we finished up designing the whole of the new wing, and on the back of that, we finished up designing all of the public parts of the hotel as well. So it was the most extraordinary project for me. And this is, the great romantic vision of St Pancras seen from Islington. And on the left, we have the a view from the I don't know, early 20th century, I think, and you can see the great hotel. I think this is before the entrance move, so this is a canopy over the entrance, but the main entrance was under here. And if you just look around the corner, you can see that this bit of arcade carries on at ground level. And then there are odd bits of building above it, and that's the edge of the train shed. So our design for the 170 hotel bedrooms was to replace the previous design, which was for a monolithic building, which was 7-8 stories high, and we extended the first floor, and then you can see that there's a line here. So there are two lines of rooms, and then similarly here under the single arch there are two ranges of rooms. Then there's a triple one, which is like the ones on the main building, and then you get the roof. So in fact, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-story building masquerading as a sort of 2-story building, and that got permission, and you can see some of the intricacies about. This is Gilbert Scott as he goes around the corner, but you can see the building, which is then the stories of that high, have been subdivided here and here. And so we were using the same sort of device for designing it. And the whole thing is detailed as brickwork, 9-inch brickwork with half a brick stepping back each time you get a plane of recession. But the trouble was that the building here was sitting on top of the loading bay of the railway, and so there was a length of 2 lorries with no columns at all. So this is a 2-story steel truss to span over the loading bay. And then there was no strength on the frontage either, so that these are cantilever beams coming in from behind, which are hang. So these 2 stories of rooms are hung from that cantilever beam. I mean, it's a crazy bit of structure, but it's heroic. Nobody knows quite how complicated it is. And then this just shows our new brickwork with the very beautifully laid. And then, as far as the conversion is concerned, then the way into the hotel here was an open roadway for taxis to drop people off and pick them up. And so we leveled it and we had to decide where to put the steps. So we kept a ramp up to the main entrance, this is all a new infill. And then you carry on up the steps here. And if you're in a wheelchair, you go to the side and then the ramp carries on. And this is what I call the Carlo Scarpa detail, where you get a gap between the new element and the complicated moldings of the thing beside, in order to avoid the steps crunching into the into the moldings. And then the breakthrough important because the lifts are entirely new. This is a new lift bank here. This is the way that we solved the incredible problem of turning a window with a shaft which came right down the middle into a doorway. So you can see all of the moldings cut through here. Just some of the pleasures of dealing with Gilbert Scott. And then you get inside, you get the famous staircase. We didn't really do anything on the staircase, but we did redecorate it. And interestingly, we wanted to paint it with the decoration that we knew was there originally. This is from about 1900. And they said that this fleur-de-lis was now distinctive, and therefore it shouldn't be replaced with the earlier scheme. And then this is the amazing ladies' smoking room on the first floor. So all of the paint was uncovered and then recreated on top of intumescent paper because we needed the intumescent. Part of the project involved creating a sort of executive suite on part of the platform level, which had been used for kitchens and so on for the station. And when we took down all the blockwork and suspended ceilings, this is what we found. In fact, quite a high level of survival, which nobody knew at all. This is interesting. This is the curved stair, which was chopped off halfway down. And if you look here, you see you get the arcade, and you get the holes cut for the suspended ceiling. And that's it. Now, we had to have a lowered ceiling in order to get all the services in, but we put a mirror in here so that you can, you get some sense of it going through, and otherwise this is all cleaned up and repaired. And just thought I'd show you the latest redoing of the bar that is just finished recently by a French interior designer, Hugo Toro. And I was advising on getting the consent for it. And actually, it's it's really rather splendid. And from my point of view, it also gave the opportunity to get rid of the light fittings, which were in the previous scheme, which were hiding the back bar here. So it actually shows off Gilbert Scott's scheme better as well. So there it is in all its glory, with the crumbling away down the new wing there. I think this is my last one. If you can bear with me for 2 or 3 minutes, I think it's probably worth it. Old Royal London Hospital is a hospital which had just been replaced with a massive new hospital in East London. And so the old hospital was a question of what was it going to be used for? And in fact, it's being taken over as the town hall for the local authority, which is actually a fantastic use and very, very public use. So there'll be a library on the ground floor, and then meeting rooms, council chamber, offices, and so on. And in a funny way, the plan of the hospital works very well for that use. And so this is the London Hospital. And I was intrigued to read. Someone's noise coming through. Yeah. Intrigued to read that that this was started off as being an 18th century building, and I thought, well, how on earth is this an 18th century building? And the answer is that if you look at the lower photograph here, then the 18th century building is from off the page here, so off the page here, and it's just those 3 floors, and then in front of it, they built what was built as a chapel, and then to the side of it, there's a wing called the Grocer's Wing from the 1870s, and an extra floor was added over the whole thing for operating theatres in 1906. So, I mean, it's an incredibly, wonderfully complicated building. And here, although a really rather lovely operating theatre from 1906 with its massive glazed gable in order to give plenty of natural light when you're doing your operating. So, and here we are. This is the 18th century hospital in its heyday, 1752, and the chapel sort of sits in front of that, and we're just seeing that bit and that bit of it. And the way it worked was that you had a central corridor, you had smaller rooms on this side, you had wards here and here, and then you had wings with wards sticking back here. Well, those have gone. And these photographs show the subsequent history. So the chapel, for example, you see round-headed windows all the way along when it was first built, but by this stage, that one is still there, but these ones have been chopped in half with square-headed windows. And here's the operating theatre. And here's the rather intimidating staircases of 1906 with the screens, which are supposed to stop people hurling themselves off in despair, I think. And then the rear elevation, and it was this that was my main contribution, because they were going to knock down the whole of the back set of rooms on the grounds that there was practically nothing left of the 18th century building. And I looked at it and I said, that's absolute rubbish. If you color it up, then blue is the 18th century building, and you can see with only 2 exceptions here and 1 here, it's all intact. So it's now keeping and repairing that elevation. So here's the 18th century hospital. Here is the Grocer's Wing, which is, you enter underneath the historic brickwork by going down a ramp. And then you go back up again, and then there's a library leading through to the council chamber, and you get the meeting rooms and so on here, and you get the open plan offices, and then there's an atrium between one and the other, which gives you the view of the 18th century repaired elevation. So this is it now on the left. This is a photo simulation before the event, but this is the real thing now. And you can see the it's repaired with bricks put in where the balconies were, for example, but it's not over repaired, that there's plenty of scars of what was there to read anyway. This is about recording. This is the roof of the grocer's wing, which I love because you get inverted trusses. They're the wrong way up. So this is a cantilever from the central corridor to hold up that bit of the roof. And then here we get some terrazzo flooring. And here we get, these are zinc plates, which are identifying the chimney flues for the poor old sweeps who had to keep them clean. Grocer's wing is facade retention. One or two bits of discovery. This is a window which had been covered up, and it's very common for all of the windows to be painted like hardwood, not white. And then this is, it takes 10 people to decide how to replace the windows. So in fact, they're all replaced with a dark color, which makes up for the difference of the different types. And then the chapel, and I just finish with, if you look on the right there, this is a panel which has had water going through it. And I carefully recorded the, what I call the triptych, which is three adjacent panels showing the moldy plaster behind here, and then the disintegrating plywood in front, because I think it's very beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. Amazing. How are you fixed for time? Can we sort of open up the floor for questions?
Yeah, that's okay for a bit. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a whole list of questions I've already got down here, but I'm going to allow the students to ask some questions. I'll probably just open up by saying I think the timing of this lecture was pretty good considering where we are within the workshop. We're sort of having a lot of the discussions that you quite elegantly presented today in regards to choices made and trade-offs between one and another choice with the students in regards to how they would potentially go about the restoration of what is considered to be a historic structure. So I think it was fantastic to have you at this point in the workshop, actually. I might start with a question, if that's okay, while the students sort of gather themselves. You spoke a bit about the change of use in some of the buildings, and I know in some buildings you don't tend to do that, but in others you make a conscious change, a conscious choice to make a change. And you do so because I guess you're talking about economic sustainability for those buildings, like an old house is converted into a cafe. What drives that sort of decision? What are the criteria by which you choose one particular structure to have a change of use and another one not to, so to speak? And maybe a bit more detailed in regards to sort of digging a bit deeper in that, then you have to make certain choices in regards to the loss of fabric in order to accommodate that change of use. What are the driving factors there?
Well, I think it's probably true that purely in use terms, the choices may have been made at an earlier an earlier stage. In other words, that we come in to investigate and make it work. So St. Alfred was very much a case where I don't think the client knew how to put together a coherent project to get HLF funding. It was a little bit here, a little bit here. But then at the end of the day, it remains a church in use, but with a visitor present. So that may be not quite the case. If you're talking about other buildings, then I suppose it's probably that the client, whoever they are, has some idea about how it's used, and then they get you in the first place to carry out a feasibility study. And so the feasibility study is investigating whether or not it's possible to do something. And occasionally it's looking at a whole range of different options for use. And there's something called historic building preservation trusts, who take on the sort of buildings that no developer would take on because they need subsidy. And the idea there is that you do them up and then they sell them on. And therefore it was nearly always, in that case, it was either residential or it was offices, because those were the sort of things you could predict. And so I'm not that I've been too often in the position of suggesting, although I suppose I think that most historic buildings which started off as houses, perhaps, we're not maybe talking about the big ones now, but they all need certain things. They all need access. They all need loos. They all need heating. They all need, in my view, a cafe, because that's the best way of getting access plus money at the same time, and enjoyment. And then beyond that, then you add in a bit of function rooms at Clissold House, or you have a rehearsal studio at somewhere else. So I often think it's a mistake to think of a use as being too rigid, rather than being a sort of range of possibility.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the particular structure that we're looking at with the students is a hammam, a bathhouse. And there is, we seem to have a divide where some people are quite strict and sort of want to convert it back or restore it back into a bathhouse, and others are thinking of alternatives. If I can follow up that with another question while the guys is gone, you spoke about over repaired. That's a phrase that I've not heard before. You know, to a certain extent, the balancing act between what you repair and what you leave. So sometimes you leave the scars of what's existed. In particular, when you were talking about the house that was occupied by illegal settlers, if we can call them that, and graffitied, and you maintain the graffiti. How do you sort of balance that? What would you consider over repaired, and what would you, I suppose, consider scars that should be maintained and shouldn't be maintained? What are the thought processes behind those choices?
Well, we're in an unusual position in England, as opposed to anywhere either in Europe or the rest of the world, that our view on historic buildings is quite strongly shaped by William Morris. And he said that following Ruskin, that your authenticity, if you like, was what it was, and therefore anything which was tended towards restoration, in other words, putting something back to a state that it had been previously, was deeply suspect, partly because it took away the texture of age, and in other words, it comes out looking brand new. And so I'm conscious in my own work that I've always taken a quizzical view of that, because I think there are places where one wants to restore something back to the way that it looked. But you react to different buildings in different ways. And even at Sutton House, you could say that I reacted in different ways, even in the same room, because the photograph where I showed the cobwebs, you still got the Victorian room, which is pretty much, you might say, restored with the cornice and the paint and the wood effect graining. So I think that I'm quite happy to be accused of being inconsistent, because I would say that I'm trying to react in a more subtle way to different things, rather than taking a doctrinaire, say you shall do this or you shan't do this. I don't know if that makes sense, but but restoration, in the sense of making everything look squeaky clean, has always been a little bit of a no-no in the way we think about things here. And I'm therefore always, really interested in relation to the extent to which that view can really be carried on in other parts of the world, where either the nature of the materials or the nature of the threats, or the fact that things have been destroyed in war, or whatever it may be, mean that you haven't got the luxury of being as sort of picky as we possibly can in this country.
Yes. It's open. I saw some of you waving fists in the air as Richard mentioned, answer to the last question with excitement that you don't have to restore it back to its original shape. At least we've got some converted in the group already that I can see. I mean, this is a great opportunity for you. It's a privilege to have Richard with us. And I think some of the questions that you're probably going to ask myself and Philippos over the next 2 days might be sort of pointed towards Richard now at this moment. So feel free to ask a question. I'll leave the sort of floor open for the next few minutes. We've taken quite a lot of Richard's time, so we'll give it another few minutes before we close, I guess.
Hello, can I?
Of course you can.
Thank you. So first of all, it was such inspiration. Like, seriously, thank you so much for it was great. And I had one question to be asked. It is so interesting to see that the restoration is not just about the building, but the connection with urban and how the landscape is connected to the building. I saw in 2 of your projects that in the first one, if I'm not mistaken, it was the porch of a cafe, which you rose the grass and the field. And that one actually was so interesting. And the other one, you in fact increased the level of the field. So actually my question was for the second one, because I was pretty sure that increasing the level of the ground would have been full of consequences, because the other side was a street. So if I'm not mistaken, my question is dedicated to the chapel, which had same area dedicated to both disabled people using the stairs and people using the stair usually, as usual. So that landscape, I wanted to know if you can explain it a little more.
Well, the access for disabled people has become increasingly important. And I remember when I started my career, I mean, it seemed to me unfortunate, as it were, that a few people in wheelchairs could mess up a historic building. I mean, to characterize it. And now I realize how wrong I was, and I was in a wheelchair myself for a bit, and so I think that the designing for disability access is actually the greatest design challenge that we've got very often, because the technical requirements for ramps and handrails and this, that, and the other are pretty prescriptive. And if you're trying to do that in a historic context, then it's very easy to mess it up. So that's why I feel, really pleased that after 25 years, I got that ramp to work at St Alphege, and I do think that it's quite beautiful as well as working. And too often the things look like a bit of functional accessory that's there that you put up with, but and so I can't bear doing that. And so of the ones you're talking about, then the one which was the very long curved one was one way. The one with the platform lift, which is where you in effect have got a space wide enough to be able to give half to people on foot and then half to the. So I was architect at one of the big cathedrals in London, and there are 23 steps from the entrance at the west to the chapel at the east, 23 steps. And so there are three platform lifts to get you up there, and a couple of ramps. I hope that they kind of fit in reasonably well. And so the thing about giving them their dignity by having them equal width is actually quite an important part of that. It's not saying it's an apologetic thing. I mean, am I answering your question?
Yeah, actually, yeah. The consequences were quite reasonable. Thank you.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, we could end. I have more questions, but I'm not sure if everyone wants to listen to me asking questions. So, I mean, for me, there's a fascination with balancing the old versus the new. There's a few projects that you show. I think the question that you sort of answered now in regards to disability access, a lot of these structures were designed in a time where we didn't have the same constraints and the same requirements as we do today. So inevitably, the restoration back to the original is doing them a disservice, because it's by virtue of restoring it back to something which was built 150 years ago, you're almost making it unusable in a strange way. It is beautiful to have these as artifacts that represent a certain era or part of history, but they become unusable. In some of your projects where you have to balance this aspect of preserving the building or part of the function, whilst adding new design elements in, where you so elegantly talk about the use of bronze color instead of the normal color of steel, or a different white color of steel, which is synonymous with sort of modern architecture, so to speak. But how do you go about those decisions, and to what extent is it required to have that compromise? I know there's obviously a trade-off within any project against these requirements. What weight do you put in which basket, and versus preserving old, and how militant do you become about not adding anything new into the structure?
Well, I think it's possible to answer that question in relation to the methodology that we're supposed to use anyway, because okay, you've done your investigations and you've got a reasonable understanding of the history of how something comes to be in it, but the next bit is the really crucial one, is saying what is significant about it. So in my case, then, as you can see, I mean, in one case it might be the cobwebs, in another place it might be the decoration, in another place it might be the fact that the stonework looks rather beautiful in its eroded state, in another it's because of the purity of the form is uppermost. And I increasingly think that the historical emphasis in England, and it may not be the case elsewhere, but in England is about what we call historic fabric. In other words, the actual stuff, and therefore what you do with the stuff is what counts. And I say, well, that's not nearly good enough, because what also counts, surely, is what the building means to people, about what you find beautiful about it. It's just the fact that, and if you go the route of authenticity, well, you know, look more carefully and you discover the plaster was replaced in 1920. You know, I mean, you know, nothing is as authentic as it might appear to be at first glance. And so I have a real problem with Ruskin, but slightly less with William Morris. But so anyway, what I was coming around to say is that I would relate it to, if you go back to ancient philosophy, metaphysics, and Plato, then they talk about the difference between substance and essence. And I have been quite keen on relating this to buildings, old buildings, because substance is the same as fabric. In other words, the substance of the building is stone and mortar and paint and whatever, but the essence is about the idea of the building. It's about the design of the building, and therefore, you know, you could contrast, you know, the William Morris or the Ruskin view about essence as being fabric, to being, let's say, Le Corbusier, who says, you know, architecture is the magnificent accumulation of forms in light, or whatever it is. And, you know, that is nothing to do with fabric at all. It's about something, it's closer to the essence in Platonic terms, I'd say. So, anyway, yeah.
Thank you very much. I mean, we could carry on for hours, I feel. Does anyone else have any other questions? I just want to remind everyone that Richard's kindly agreed to offer a discount code for his book, which after this lecture, I'm definitely purchasing, using and abusing the discount code. But I would highly recommend it to everyone else.
Yeah, if you want to get it through the website for the cheaper price, then it's RGA20. Perfect. Where you ask for the code or something. Yeah, your discount code RGA20.
I will share it. We have an internal WhatsApp group, and I'm sure everyone on the team will share it with whoever's joined us. Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think for the group that we're working with now, it was. I hope it was as exciting as it was for me, because I think it begins to highlight a certain number of avenues in which we can pursue the project that we're sort of dealing with at the moment. With that, I'll thank everyone for joining. Just to remind you, we do have another one similar to this tomorrow, so I'll share details and information on that through the same avenues and channels as we did today. Thank you very much, Richard. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
And good luck with your hammam project.
Thank you very much. We'll share the results with you. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Good night.